is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe. Live from CGTN in London, I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. China's century. Spectacular celebrations to mark the 100th anniversary of the founding of its Communist Party.
Our other headlines, driving to a green future. Nissan announces major plans to expand electric vehicle production in the UK, creating thousands of new jobs.
Travel within Europe gets easier, but only if you have an EU digital COVID certificate.
Former US President Trump's property empire faces possible criminal charges after months of investigations into its tax affairs.
And the French town known as Little Venice that played a surprising part in the founding of modern China.
China's marking the 100th anniversary of its Communist Party. Beijing has hosted a grand ceremony with music and fireworks to mark the event.
President Xi Jinping delivered the keynote speech. He looked back on the party's history and looked forward, calling on young Chinese to carry on the legacy. CGTN's Cui Huiao reports.
A dignified march across Tiananmen Square at the heart of Beijing. The honor guards marched on the red carpet and raised the Chinese flag. In his speech, President Xi Jinping, also the General Secretary of the party, highlighted the CPC's journey over the past century. One of the greatest achievements, he said, was to build a moderately prosperous society.
We have realized the first centenary goal of building a moderately prosperous society in all respects. This means that we have brought about a historic resolution to the problem of absolute poverty in China.
President Xi called on party members to continue working together to realize the Chinese dream. That is to build China into a strong, prosperous, and harmonious nation. The CPC went from a small group of around 50 members to now one of the world's largest political parties with more than 95 million members.
We must tighten the party's organizational system, work hard to train high-caliber officials who have both moral integrity and professional competence, remain committed to improving party conduct, upholding integrity, in combating corruption, and root out any elements that would harm the party's advanced nature and purity and any viruses that would erode its health.
Over the past century, China has been transformed from a poor and backward country to the world's second largest economy. As the CPC celebrates this important milestone today, a new chapter has also begun. The party says it plans to draw experience and strength from history as it forges ahead to further rejuvenate the nation and, more importantly, to build a better life for the Chinese people.
伟大光荣正确的中国共产党万岁！伟大光荣英雄的中国人民万岁！
Cui Huiao, CGTN, reporting from Tiananmen Square in Beijing.
The 1st of July is also a significant date in Hong Kong. The Special Administrative Region is celebrating the 24th anniversary of its return to China. A flag-raising ceremony marked the beginning of the celebration. Acting Chief Executive John Lee, along with hundreds of political, business and community leaders, attended the event. Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam is in Beijing for the centenary celebrations.
Rana Mitter is Professor of History and Politics of Modern China at the University of Oxford. I asked him to explain the rise of the Communist Party of China and whether there are any similarities with today's world, like the pandemic and its economic consequences.
That's an extraordinarily interesting question, actually, because 100 years ago, of course, we were talking about the aftermath of several cataclysmic events, the First World War, and also, of course, the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, which was a very direct inspiration for the founding of the Chinese Communist Party in 1921. So in that sense, we're talking about a world in turmoil in the early 20s, which, of course, this new fledgling Chinese party emerged into. Now, what's the similarity and differences with today? Well, today, the Chinese Communist Party is nothing like a fledgling party. It's got 90 million members. It's probably the largest political party in the world, in fact. But it also, of course, is operating at a time when global order is changing. And the pandemic, of course, is the kind of global crisis that in some ways you can compare to that earlier one. Well, what difference will that make? I think that China and actually the world are going to be thinking a lot more about borders during this time. The fact is that the fast spread of the virus has meant that borders have opened and shut, often with frightening unpredictability over the last year or so. And I think that China, as much as any other country, perhaps even more so, is going to be thinking very strongly about how perhaps it operates in the virtual world in terms of its agendas, in terms of changing order, because actually physical borders between China and the rest of the world are probably going to be quite limited, relatively closed, for at least a year or more to come.
What do you think has been the secret of its longevity? When you look through these decades, we've seen the end of empires, the end of kings.
Flexibility has been the key to success. So let's think about 100 years ago, the foundation of the Chinese Communist Party. What sort of party was it then? Well, it was actually a very intellectual party in many ways. It was founded really by almost all young men at that point, although some young women actually did join in later years in the mid-1920s, and that's important to remember as well. But they were inspired by Marxism, they were inspired by Russian anarchism, a whole variety of different intellectual trends at that time. And then if you fast forward to the middle of the 20th century, you're talking about the period when essentially the party becomes a war communist party. In other words, the war against the Japanese during the middle of World War II, that's a really important way of shifting the national priorities that the party thinks about. Then, of course, we get to the early period of Mao Zedong, Chairman Mao's period in power. In some ways, you could say the economic impact of that shift at that time was the influence of the Soviet Union, the command economy that looked very much from the top down towards collectivization of farms, collectivization of industry. And then fast forward again to the more contemporary era from the 1980s onwards. That is a Chinese Communist Party that talks about markets in a way that I think actually that its predecessor versions wouldn't have done in the same sort of a way. And we all know that the Chinese Communist Party has made a really important part of its shifting structure, the trying out of different sorts of market experiments in different parts of China. So you might think about South China, provinces like Guangdong, where Deng Xiaoping back in the 1980s wanted to try out special economic zones. Or, of course, the way in which various aspects of China's economy today, including, of course, the consumer economy, are very, very dependent on markets. And we all know, having looked at the 5-year plan that's just been issued a few weeks ago, the consumer economy is going to be a large part of that. So in the last 100 years, there have been an awful lot of flexible adaptations and changes, even though the name of the party, of course, has stayed the same throughout that time.
And we'll have much more on the celebrations of the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party of China with some spectacular images from that centenary gala later in this programme.
Nissan has announced a $1.4 billion plan to expand electric vehicle production in the UK. The Japanese carmaker says a new energy hub in Sunderland will create 1,650 new jobs and a further 4,500 posts throughout its supply chain. It will also build a new generation EV model with a battery gigafactory set to power its vehicles.
This is the first time that Nissan is announcing product, battery, and the renewable energy. What does it mean? It means that we clearly started laying down the road towards the carbon neutrality. And that's why we believe it's a great day for Nissan, for UK, for our employees, our suppliers, our dealers, and most important, society and environment.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent Andrew Wilson in Oxford. So, Andrew, a big win for the UK here, with the Prime Minister describing the investment as a major vote of confidence in the country.
Yeah, the Prime Minister's thrilled, the government's thrilled. This is all about creating jobs, which they've managed to do. They've pulled off this deal with Nissan, persuaded the company to stay in the UK and carry on producing cars here. And overall, that and the attached gigafactory run by Chinese firm Envision to produce batteries for the cars, there's like 6,000 jobs at least involved in just that project. Not to mention 10 solar farms that will need to be created around the Sunderland area. That's money going to the local authority as well, so they can get involved as well as that. So it's a win for the government in that respect, but also bear in mind it's a real bullet dodged as well, because Nissan was saying before the Brexit deal was cast that they had a big question mark over whether or not they'd actually stay in the UK unless the UK fell in line with how Brussels wants to see cars produced in the future. And they have fallen in line. There's been a fair amount of investment from the government. Some people say about $100 million. It could be a lot more than that as well. But the real issue is the safeguarding of jobs. Nissan's been around in the UK since 1986, when Margaret Thatcher brought them in with their automated plants. It's basically responsible for about 46,000 jobs in the UK, separate from Sunderland. If Nissan had left the country, those would have gone as well. Prime Minister, front and centre of the whole operation, of course.
Is make sure that we get value for money. And the great thing about this investment and the creation of this gigafactory is, as I say, it's going to drive down the cost of EVs, not just for people who are currently buying them, but so ordinary families can buy EVs as a matter of course. And that will, I think, start to happen in just a few years' time.
So, Andrew, Prime Minister Boris Johnson there singing the praises of this deal. But when it comes to battery production, this is on a pretty small scale, isn't it?
It is. I mean, it's a step in the right direction. Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary, said today that he thought it was a huge step forward in ambition for the UK and putting the UK at the front of the global electric vehicle race. I think that's something of an exaggeration at this stage. This will be a 9-gigawatt plant. It may upscale to about 12 in a couple of years, with an eventual target perhaps in the UK by 2030 of 25 gigawatts of these batteries being produced. Compare that with 2025 target for Germany, which is 164 gigawatts. Now, the whole genesis of these factories is because the EU-UK deal, post-Brexit, demanded that any cars sold in the European Union post-Brexit, or in the years to come now, must have at least 70% of their components from EU or UK within the construction. That meant the batteries definitely had to be manufactured near the points of manufacture. So that's why Nissan has brought this in, so that the UK can carry on trading with the European Union. But it's going to be a tough climb. Envision, the Chinese company that's backing up the Nissan plant in Sunderland, has just signed a deal with Renault as well to do the same thing in Paris. And there are hopes that Vauxhall might do something similar in the next few weeks concerning its Ellesmere Port plant near Liverpool. So these new gigafactories are going to start popping up all over Europe and the UK. But at the moment, the UK is trailing pretty far behind. But the enthusiasm for this plant may well also lead to more money from the government to spread the networks of charge points so that more people will feel encouraged to buy EVs, and more importantly, electric vehicles might come down in price as well. So the motor manufacturers who would prefer something like 60 gigawatts to be produced by the end of the decade rather than the 25 that's projected are still saying this is at least a step in the right direction, albeit a fairly modest one.
Andrew Wilson, thanks very much.
The US retailer Gap is the latest fashion chain to shut up shop on Britain's high streets after buyers reined in their spending on clothing during the pandemic.
The latest closures come as the UK starts to reduce its furlough scheme as the country tries to get its economy back on its feet. CGTN's correspondent Nicole Johnston reports.
US clothing store Gap is about to close all of its UK stores, all 81 of them. And it means more than 1,000 employees will lose their jobs. The shops will start shutting in August, but online sales will continue. Last month, the Californian-based company said it would close 19 stores. But now it's decided to shut the doors on all of them. Gap will also be selling off stores in Italy and France. It's the latest fashion chain to leave the British high street during the pandemic. Other brands, including Topshop, Debenhams, Oasis,
Warehouse, Karen Millen and Laura Ashley have all closed their stores.
Last year, clothing sales fell while people stayed at home during the pandemic, and many of them have continued to work from home. Gap sales fell by 16%. And many people no longer want fast fashion. They want sustainable, long-lasting clothing brands.
Since the pandemic started, around 190,000 people have lost their jobs in retail in the UK. Meanwhile, the government is starting to wind down its furlough scheme.
Employees will receive 80% of their salaries. This will go down to 70%, but the employers, the companies, will have to contribute more to it. More than 1.3 million people are on furlough across the country, and it's set to last until September. Nicole Johnston, CGTN, London.
The world's second largest fashion retailer, H&M, has reported better than expected second quarter profits, but says global sales growth slowed in the second half of June. H&M says sales for June were down by 4% compared to 2019, indicating a stop-start recovery from the pandemic as restrictions ease and stores reopen. The retailer says 95 of its 5,000 stores still remain closed, down from 1,300 at the start of March.
Eurozone manufacturing grew at a record pace in June. The cost of raw materials and the number of new jobs also rose at the fastest rate in more than 2 decades. Some economists are worried that the pandemic recovery could result in too much inflation.
Pepsi says it plans to cut the sugar in its drinks in Europe by a quarter in the next 4 years. It also plans to launch a new range of low-fat snacks to attract more health-conscious customers in its second biggest global market. Soft drinks makers are under pressure across EU countries, where several governments have introduced taxes on sugary foods and drinks to tackle obesity.
The Russian Soyuz rocket has successfully launched 36 OneWeb satellites, bringing the total to 254. The London-headquartered tech company is working to deliver a global internet service from space. The network's far from complete. There are now enough satellites to start offering a commercial service across the Northern Hemisphere later this year.
An 82-year-old pilot called Wally Funk will become the oldest person to fly to space later this month. Billionaire Amazon founder Jeff Bezos has given her a seat on the first manned flight of his aerospace company, Blue Origin. She'll travel with Bezos, his brother, and the anonymous winner of an auction. Funk trained for America's first space mission in the 1960s, but the program for female astronauts was cancelled.
And from space travel to another kind of flying. It's not a bird or a plane, but it's a car. This prototype vehicle has flown between 2 cities in Slovakia. The air car can transform from road car to aircraft in under 3 minutes. To see it in action, europe.cgtn.com.
And on Friday, we'll be speaking to the co-founder of the firm behind the air car here on Global Business Europe. Do join us for that. Well, now you're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Focus on Africa. Huawei's plans for expanding 5G.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But When the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe, live from London. A reminder for you that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Now, European holidays just got a little easier. Starting today, EU citizens are allowed to move freely within the Union if they have an EU digital COVID certificate. The app is now live, but it can only be used by people already inside the EU, not those trying to enter it. Well, our correspondent Ryan Thompson is at Frankfurt Airport for us. Ryan, how's it looking there? Busy?
Hi there, Jamie. Well, this isn't the first time we've spoken to you live from this big hub here in Frankfurt. Compared to the other times, it's definitely picking up a little bit, little by little. We're starting to see far less business travelers and a few people donning vacation hats and special vacation shirts, ready to go off on a nice holiday. But speaking to a lot of people here today, they're not exactly so sure about this technology, right? They've heard about it on the news, but they're coming in here with much more of an old-fashioned or pre-high-tech approach to getting on these planes. Printed certificates, printed vaccination certificates, printed test results. The EU has said there will be a 6-week trial period, implementation period, as they roll out this technology. And it's certain that though today is day one, it will be a little bit way more to go before they can fully get this up to speed.
From France to Croatia, airports and airlines across Europe are embracing the EU's digital COVID certificate, a unique QR code that allows travelers to prove they're healthy and fit to cross borders.
This certificate is a symbol of an open and digital Europe. We developed this certificate in record time. It will make travel in our union easier, and it will give Europeans back the freedoms they value and cherish so much.
But with vaccinations still in high demand across Europe, the EU is selling the app as a travel pass and not a vaccination passport. You can also get the green light to travel if you've recently tested negative for COVID-19 or have recovered from a positive infection in the past few months.
Previously, even a simple trip to the airport meant carrying pages and pages of documents. A negative PCR test, a travel declaration, and proof that you actually need to travel. But now, with restrictions finally relaxed, all of this goes away.
21 EU countries are issuing the digital COVID pass, and 6 others say they're technically ready but need more time to start using it. Airline groups have criticized those countries for not being ready sooner.
A long time ago, when the DCC proposal was launched in March, they all agreed to the principle and all thought it was a wonderful idea, and it was going to be GDPR compliant. But then when member states need to implement it, you still see that there are, I would not say technical, but apparently in some cases legal barriers. So member states, in some cases, are simply too slow to implement legally, to have national legal framework ready.
For now, only those living in the European Union can benefit from the digital COVID pass. But there are ongoing talks with the United Kingdom and United States that may eventually mean mutual recognition and open an even bigger network of international destinations.
Ryan, so as I understand it, countries outside the EU might be able to enter this scheme at a later date. What more can you tell us?
Yeah, so Jamie, as it exists now, it's a bit of a patchwork of rules. If you're from the UK, you can enter Spain, you can enter Croatia, you can enter Greece. Similar rules if you're coming from the United States as well. What they are aiming to do here is to make it so that if you're coming from the UK or you're coming from the US, those are the two big countries we're talking about, you will be able to have a seamless entry into the European Union. You won't have to go through these patchwork rule networks and really end up in a complicated situation. As far as we understand now, that is a little bit of a way off, but it could be in place perhaps by the end of the summer.
Ryan Thompson at Frankfurt Airport, thank you very much.
Now, if you can't live without your mobile phone, then this is for you. It's the final day of the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. The event, which was cancelled in 2020, is the world's biggest trade fair for the mobile telecommunications industry.
But the pandemic has forced many big names like Samsung and Vodafone to stay away, instead choosing to showcase their latest products virtually. Rahul Pathak reports.
Its last-minute cancellation in 2020, a sign of the growing global threat of COVID-19. Organisers hoping the return this week of the Mobile World Congress to Barcelona could signal a revival for a sector thought to have lost an estimated $42 billion in revenue last year. The MWC, as it's more commonly known, is the world's largest exhibition for the mobile telecommunications industry, with tech companies presenting their latest devices, inventions and discoveries. In his inaugural address, Spain's King Felipe also acknowledging the importance of mobile technology during the worst days of the pandemic.
Therefore, today I would like to acknowledge publicly and applaud and thank the role played by mobile connectivity, not only in the professional sphere, but also in the private sphere, helping and accompanying older people, people in hospital, and those who were alone, keeping them in touch with their families during the lockdown.
This year's scaled-down event was still one of the biggest in-person trade shows to be held since the outbreak of the pandemic. One of the big draws was Chinese mobile phone giant Huawei, as the company looks for a bigger slice of the European market. However, many big names chose not to attend.
Now, while some companies like Vodafone have chosen to opt out of having a physical presence at this year's Mobile World Congress, there has been a greater focus on those startups that are using mobile technology, especially 5G, to produce innovations that in some cases could provide health benefits for millions.
As 5G wireless technology becomes more accessible, its use in areas such as artificial intelligence and healthcare will likely expand. Neuroelectrics is a company based in Barcelona that hopes to revolutionise brain therapy to help treat patients remotely.
So as you can see, I'm going to wear it right now. This is a wireless technology, so it's a cap. These little currents that we can inject from any electrode into the brain have a potential amazing therapeutic effect. We have shown that you can reduce seizures in children that don't respond to medication with epilepsy by injecting these little currents into the brain.
Technology applications in medicine, as in other fields, do hope to be a force for good. If this kind of technology becomes accessible and, more importantly, affordable, then there could be genuinely exciting times ahead. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
France's largest telecoms company, Orange, says that it will not use equipment from China when it develops Europe's 5G networks. But the same is not true for Africa. Orange says it has an excellent relationship with Huawei and will continue to cooperate with the Chinese company in Africa's 5G rollout. Paolo Pescatore is a tech, media and telco analyst at PP Foresight. I asked him how important Africa is for Huawei.
It's an important market to enable connectivity to the masses and bridge that digital divide. And specifically for Huawei, where they've struggled for obvious reasons in other markets as a result of the swap out and security concerns. It's really a strong endorsement of Huawei's capabilities that Orange is looking towards Huawei and other partners to help with the deployment of 5G. And it makes logical sense for all parties, and specifically for users in Africa as well.
Why has there been a reluctance to invest in 5G in Africa so far?
Well, I think there are a number of reasons, really, and you can't just boil it down to one. And typically, the arrival of new technology has always taken some time to become available in Africa, and simply because of the cost of deployment, the availability of licenses, and most importantly, disposable income is not as high as many of the developed countries. And of course, there are challenges in actually upgrading those networks because of the lack of connectivity and power in some of the remote parts of Africa. Hence why 5G is going to be so important, and it will be a significant step change in the user experience for customers.
Do you think this support for Huawei will impact other 5G providers in Africa?
Yeah, I think, Huawei has excelled to date in the delivery of its equipment, and it's one of the few providers that's been able to tailor offerings specifically to carriers in a very much cost-effective and competitive way. And ultimately, it will kickstart the rollout and deployment of 5G all across Africa.
And Orange has also said it's planning to use gear from Samsung. How significant could that be?
Well, that is hugely significant because obviously everything that's going on in the marketplace, there are very, very few network vendors to choose from. And all of a sudden, we're now seeing the re-emergence of players like Samsung, as well as other new players as well. So it's great news for Samsung. And as operators look towards having a multi-vendor approach towards the deployment of next-generation networks.
So you talked about the digital divide. How important will 5G be for Africa?
Oh, it's going to be absolutely massive. And, given the challenges of connecting people to fiber, gigabit, which are, we are very fortunate to have those types of levels of connectivity in most parts of the developed world. 5G will allow people to have significant speeds with low latencies and really transform the industries and even education to the masses.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, the EU gets a new president, but not everyone is happy to see his face at the helm.
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens. 4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, Radio Lab, clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Oh, no.
We hope it will happen. We have to live it out.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN. Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories: China's century, spectacular celebrations to mark the 100th anniversary of the founding of its Communist Party.
Driving to a green future. Nissan announces major plans to expand electric vehicle production in the UK, creating thousands of new jobs.
And travel within Europe gets easier, but only if you have an EU digital COVID certificate.
The EU presidency has now passed to Slovenia. Prime Minister Janez Janša takes over at a turbulent time in the Union's history as member states clash over democratic values.
Janša is a close ally of Hungary's Viktor Orban, who fell out with Brussels over an anti-gay law. Penelope Lierch reports.
Slovenia's taken over the rotating presidency from Portugal at a very important time for the EU as the region continues to fight and recover from the pandemic. The EU presidency is seen mostly as a bureaucratic tool helping to set calendars and meeting agendas, but there is some concern about Slovenia taking on this position at a time where there's a strong spotlight on democratic standards within member states. Slovenia has clashed with Brussels over a number of issues in the past. Notably, Slovenian Prime Minister Janez Janša is a close ally of Hungarian leader Viktor Orban. In the past few weeks, he's remained silent as the majority of EU member countries called out Hungary for a new LGBT law that bans LGBT education for those aged under 18. Hungary could eventually be sanctioned for this, for breaking the values of the European Union. The Slovenian Prime Minister is also a very vocal supporter of Donald Trump. During the US election, he retweeted a number of voter fraud theories and even predicted now President Joe Biden would be one of the weakest presidents in history, only congratulating him after he'd been sworn into office. He himself has recently survived an impeachment mention in the past few months after the opposition called him out for allegedly clamping down on media freedom within the country and also mismanaging the pandemic, with particular concerns around the supply of vaccines. The Slovenian president, however, has rejected claims that the Prime Minister's politics will hurt the EU presidency.
I do not share these very sharp assessments. I said it many times. Of course, there are some activities of the government that I don't agree with, but I can't accept sharp assessment about the overthrow of democracy. But there are things that there would be possible to avoid and focus on more important issues for Slovenia and Europe. I hope this is a chance for government and Prime Minister to focus more on subjects that are vital for Slovenia and the EU.
Slovenia was one of the first former communist states to join the EU back in 2004 and has previously held EU presidency in 2008. Penelope Lierch, CGTN.
The property company of former US President Donald Trump is facing possible criminal charges in a New York court. The Trump Organization is facing an investigation on a number of fronts, including allegations of tax-free perks being offered to staff, including the company's top financial director. Let's go live now to New York and talk to our correspondent, John Terrett. So, John, what's going on? What more can you tell us?
Well, hey there, Robin. Hey there, Jamie. As you correctly identify, this is the top money man in the family-owned Trump Organization. He's called Alan Weisselberg. He's 73 years old. His official title is Chief Financial Officer, CFO, and he's basically been with the company since the 1970s, in the days when Fred Trump ran the company, and Fred Trump is Donald Trump's father. Now, you could see that this investigation into the Trump Organization is going ahead, I think, regarding Mr. Weisselberg, because they think that he knows the company top to bottom over many years, and possibly even where the bodies are buried. We'll have to see. Now, he surrendered to authorities at a lower Manhattan court this morning at about 6:20 local time, which was 10:20 GMT, and a formal announcement on the charges that are expected to be given and handed down will be in the next 90 minutes or so at about 18 hours GMT, which is 2 p.m. local time. And it's possible that Weisselberg and other members of the Trump Organization will be represented. Now, the charges, at the moment, the charges remain unsealed, so we don't know officially what they are. but there's plenty of chatter. For example, one of them is said to be the misrepresentation of property taxes in order to benefit from insurance policies. But a lot of the charges are said to revolve around unpaid tax or undeclared tax on basically company perks. And an example of that would be failing to declare or failing to pay tax on at least one of the grandchild's private school fees, of which there are apparently thousands of dollars. Also, failure to declare or failure to pay tax on Alan Weisselberg's son's rent-free apartment in Manhattan, and then failure to declare or pay on cars and clothes, things that were gifts from the Trump organization to the Weisselberg family. Now, President Trump, of course, is not being charged, certainly at this time, though his company that he has represented for so many years clearly will be a little tarnished by this. And I think that the idea behind the prosecution is to really put the pressure on Alan Weisselberg in the hope that he will say much more than the prosecutors know already about these charges. Now, he was represented this morning by his lawyer, who said publicly that Alan Weisselberg has no intention of pleading guilty to these charges, so there clearly is a court fight coming up. As for President Trump, well, he's busy doing campaign-style rallies all over the country at the moment. He has called the Manhattan District Attorney rude, nasty, and totally biased. And I think just for the benefit of our viewers around the world, the Manhattan District Attorney is Cyrus Vance. It is an elected position in America. He was unopposed at the last election. He represents the Democratic Party, which of course is not the party of President Trump, that's the Republican Party. And Cyrus Vance is due to retire from his job at the end of this year. Robin?
John, good to talk to you. John Terrett there in New York.
And let's stay in the United States because rescue efforts have been suspended at the collapsed Miami building because of fears the rest of the structure could collapse. The search for survivors was paused just before the U.S. President and First Lady were due to arrive. Joe and Jill Biden were meeting first responders and search and rescue teams. The building collapsed a week ago, killing at least 18 people. Another 145 people are still missing.
At least 485 people have died in the Canadian province of British Columbia as record-breaking temperatures continue for a fifth day. Meanwhile, more than 60 deaths in the U.S. state of Oregon have been linked to the heat, and another 20 in Washington state. Residents of the Canadian village of Lytton, which recorded the country's highest ever temperature of nearly 50 degrees Celsius, have been forced to flee from a wildfire.
Sexual assault victims have expressed their shock and anger over Bill Cosby's prison release. The American comedian and actor was freed after his 2018 conviction for drugging and molesting ex-basketball player Andrea Constand was overturned. The judges said there had been a process violation by the prosecution. It's feared this ruling could deter women from coming forward in the future.
Turkey has withdrawn from a Council of Europe treaty aimed at preventing violence against women and girls. Turkey had been the first country to ratify the Istanbul Convention in 2011. Conservative and Islamist groups have argued that the framework of the document promotes homosexuality and undermines traditional family values.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, a year on, and a doctor who helped spearhead the COVID fightback in Wuhan tells his story.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. China has been marking the centenary of the founding of the Chinese Communist Party. In the years before the party was formed, thousands of Chinese students went to France to work and study.
Some made their way to the little town of Montargis, including Deng Xiaoping, who would go on to lead China in the 1970s and 80s. Ross Cullen reports.
A quiet corner of central France, where the river Luang runs through town. Montargis is known for the network of canals which earned it the nickname of Little Venice. But it is also where some of the sparks of the Chinese Communist Revolution were lit. There is a museum to French-Chinese friendship here, explaining how and why thousands of young Chinese people came to France and hundreds came specifically to Montargis.
Amongst the people that came to France, some went back to China in 1923. There, they led the Chinese Revolution with a long march and in 1949 created the new China.
The most famous of those young students and workers who came here in the early 1900s was Deng Xiaoping. After 4 years in France and 2 in the USSR, he returned to China, rose through the ranks of the Communist Party and became China's leader. It was a political journey to the top of the party that began in Montargis. By boat and train, the young people came to work and study, as this sculpture commemorates, and in doing so, laid the foundations for what is now one of the world's biggest political parties. One historian thinks that these deep ties between Chinese and French people should be celebrated. Jean-Louis Rizzo says cultural links could help improve the current tensions between Paris and Beijing.
Aujourd'hui, nous avons des régimes différents.
We have different governments in the world. The one in China isn't the one in France. This difference of regimes should not make us forget that history, tradition and our culture can lead us to get along, and that exchange of dialogue is always preferable to confrontation.
For the people in Montargis, life is starting to return to normal as COVID-19 restrictions are eased. 100 years ago, life was different, and this is a place of special significance for China. It may be a small town, but it comes with a big history. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Montargis, Central France.
And it's not just Chinese leaders being celebrated as the Communist Party marks its centenary. Last year, China's city of Wuhan was hit hard by the pandemic.
Doctors from all over the country came to help to try to save lives. Tao Yuan tells the story of one doctor from Sichuan province who was among them.
For 2 months in early 2020, we filmed in the intensive care wards of Wuhan Red Cross Hospital. We had 18 beds accommodating critical COVID patients whose lives were hanging by a thread. The medical team was headed by Dr. Huang Xiaobo, an ICU pro brought in to help from southwest China's Chengdu city. A year and a half has passed. We caught up with Dr. Huang again in Chengdu. Looking back, he still struggles to make peace.
I came back to Chengdu, my home turf, and saw a happy and peaceful atmosphere. Our patients here at home survived one after another. It made me think of those failed cases in Wuhan, and they came crashing down on me like mountains. I felt useless. I lost faith in myself. The feeling of defeat has left its mark on me.
Huang defies the typical stereotypes of a doctor. Sentimental, bursting into sudden tunes of hope. Irrational, fighting death he knew was inevitable till the last breath.
During those 2 months in Wuhan, the country put so much faith in us and supported us unconditionally. The faith that people place in one another, that was an unbearable weight. I mustn't let them down.
Dr. Huang's ICU was the last line of defense between life and death. Apart from the patients, he needed to look after his own team.
This kind of high-intensity work put pressure on everyone. Everyone was reaching their limits. I had more than 200 people on my team. I felt sorry for taking them on this mission.
Dr. Huang's team fought for 54 days in Wuhan. Not a single medic was infected. But Dr. Huang says he's not a hero.
I only remember my failed cases. As for the successful ones, I attribute it to the patients themselves. As doctors, we only helped and waited for them to recover.
A year later, Dr. Huang and his team went back to Wuhan, to a city that was slowly healing. A grand reunion and a trip back to the ICU wards.
You see sunlight shining into the wards. It felt totally different than last year. I'm seeing this new life in Wuhan, this wonderful energy. You hear the hustle and the bustle on the streets, the liveliness of the small restaurants. The shops are all open. We need to turn the page. I think I can finally let go. I've done my best. I have no regrets.
The pain and loss from COVID-19 still fresh, but they're looking forward with hope. Taoyuan, CGTN, Wuhan.
The headlines again. China's century. Spectacular celebrations to mark the 100th anniversary of the founding of its Communist Party.
Our other headlines, driving to a greener future. Nissan announces major plans to expand electric vehicle production in the UK, creating thousands of new jobs.
And travel within Europe gets easier, but only if you have an EU digital COVID certificate.
And that's just about it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching. More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com. And do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We are on smart TV apps such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. But we leave you with those pictures from the Communist Party of China's 100th anniversary commemoration gala. From all of us in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.